Obama judges, and the Chief Justice insists all judges are independent.
Justice Roberts didn't pick this fight. The president did. And this has been literally years of attacks on the legitimacy of the court and on individual judges.
We've seen a president really trying to get Americans not to trust the judicial branch of our government. I never thought I would live to see this day, Brian.
What it really seems to come down to for him is that judges are like everyone else. You are either with him or you are against him.
I don't want to blame President Trump here because I think it was unseemly for the Chief Justice to go after the president in the first place, which is clearly what he did.
But should the press admit that most judges usually vote in a partisan way? The media pounding the president over a New York Times report that he told a top aide he wanted to order the Justice Department to prosecute Hillary Clinton and Jim Comey.
This is the president trying to directly order, through McGahn as his intermediary to DOJ, these prosecutions of Comey and Clinton. This is huge Banana Republic type territory.
This is a defining moment in the history of the Trump presidency, because this is a demonstration of his unfitness to be president of the United States, of his abuse of presidential power, of his embrace of authoritarianism.
Now, does that sound like breaking news to you? Because it isn't, it shouldn't, and because we know how the president feels about Hillary and Comey, and we know Hillary committed crimes. It's not even in dispute.
But given that the president took no action, has the coverage gone overboard? Thunderous media condemnation of the president for backing Saudi Arabia after his own CIA found that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Is Trump ignoring evidence about a brutal killing or following past presidents in cooperating with a murderous regime? Plus, the featured guest at the next White House Correspondents' Dinner will be an author, not a comedian of the type that caused last year's train wreck.
If a tree falls in the woods, how do we get Kellyanne under that tree? I'm not suggesting she gets hurt, just stuck.
Could this safe choice get the journalism dinner back on track? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. The Thanksgiving tussle began when a federal judge in San Francisco, where the decidedly liberal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is based, temporarily blocked President Trump from denying asylum appeals to immigrants who illegally crossed the southern border. And the president lashed out at the Ninth Circuit.
Well, you go to the Ninth Circuit, and it's a disgrace, and I'm going to put in a major complaint, because you cannot win, if you're us, a case in the Ninth Circuit. And I think it's a disgrace. This was an Obama judge. And I'll tell you what, it's not going to happen like this anymore.
The Associated Press asked the Chief Justice for comment, and Roberts, a George W. Bush appointee, responded by criticizing the president for the first time. We do not have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them. Now, the coverage reached saturation levels when Trump fired back on Twitter, calling the Ninth Circuit rulings very dangerous and unwise. Sorry, Chief Justice John Roberts, but you do indeed have Obama judges, and they have a much different point of view than the people who were charged with the safety of our country. Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist and a Fox News contributor. Capri Cafaro, a Washington Examiner contributor and former Democratic state senator, and Sarah Fisher, media reporter for Axios. Molly, the press is playing this as an extraordinary rebuke by the Chief Justice, who's very publicly telling the president, rather than Obama judges, Trump judges, Clinton judges, that he views judges as independent.
Well, it was an extraordinary rebuke from the Chief Justice. It was also kind of surprising to hear someone say it. The idea that we don't have judges who have one particular viewpoint or another is frankly ludicrous. It's why we have these big fights when we have Supreme Court nominees. It's why it becomes a major issue when people are running for president. And the Ninth Circuit in particular is one which has a tremendous rate of getting its rulings overturned. It's where people go to, they sort of shop around and they try and get cases there so that they can get overturned because they're known for being so partisan. So it was a very surprising thing for him to say. It's like, I think what he was trying to say was that ideally we would have a judiciary that was independent, but to not deal with the reality that we have some pretty big problems in the judiciary is is something worth commenting.
Well, I just note that there also are conservative circuits, and during the Obama administration, a lot of cases were filed in Texas, for example, to try to get a favorable ruling. But Sarah, is the press buying into the sort of civics lesson version, a kind of a hope or the idealism of, well, judges rule case by case, which they all say they're going to do at the confirmation hearings, and then, of course, mostly, with some exceptions, they vote in predictable ways?
Yeah, I actually agree with Molly on this one. I think that the press is kind of buying into this ideal that, okay, Chief Justice Roberts is doing something that's totally unprecedented by calling this out. But in reality, we know that these judges are humans. They're fought over so that they can have their perspectives be represented on that court. And so I think that they're kind of going a little bit too far here.
But isn't the press, Capri, pushing back against Trump's rebuttal about, Obama judge and so forth, because they view this as his effort to sort of undermine the legitimacy of these rulings?
Right. I mean, I think that there is some legitimacy to that argument that, while I think the overarching issue is one of aspirational about the justice system versus the reality, I think that the way that the media is couching it is in this context that President Trump doesn't have respect for the judicial system, tries to intercede in the judicial system. And one thing that really struck me about what I will loosely call here as coverage is the absolute volume of opinion pieces, whether it is from CNN, the New York Times, the New Yorker, The Hill, basically telling the American public what to think and how to interpret this issue, and how we need to see.
Isn't that what opinion writers do?
But yes, but I guess my issue here is that the volume of opinion versus just straight coverage on this particular issue, to me, as I was reviewing, was pretty almost like lopsided.
Now, this has come up before, Molly. I mean, during the campaign, candidate Trump attacked Judge Curiel, who was hearing the Trump University lawsuit and saying, well, Mexican-American judge couldn't be fair. So the press indictment here is that the president doesn't respect the independence of the judiciary.
Well, and there are many things that Trump has said that are worthy of criticism, that being a great example. The issue, though, that you can't talk about how we have a judiciary that has political bias. I mean, if it weren't true, why do the media always say when a Republican-nominated judge does something they like? If it wasn't something that was a real issue, they wouldn't have need to point out whether someone was Republican nominated or Democrat nominated. But they do. They do it because we all know it is a significant issue that plays into their rulings.
There have been a striking number of court rulings against President Trump. So what I think some people don't understand is if you're conservative, it does appear biased, as the president often said. It feels partisan.
It's going to feel partisan, but I mean, again, I think that, the Ninth Circuit is more liberal, I think, than most. I mean, you mentioned Texas, for example, the Sixth Circuit, where, Ohio has consistently, ruled more conservatively. So, I think that, there's a feeling there, but I think that, there is also newsworthiness in this, in the sense that when you have the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court in a war of words with the President of the United States, that is something that is newsworthy, regardless of the actual context of judges being politically appointed.
And the newsworthiness goes up when it's the day before Thanksgiving and not that much else is going on. And there is an above average rate of reversals by the Supreme Court for the Ninth Circuit, but there are some other circuits that have an even higher one. So the same theme in a different story, which the same argument really, Sarah, is about the independence of the Justice Department. So it was a New York Times story that was treated as a huge bombshell. It said that President Trump, according to two unnamed sources familiar with the conversation, had ordered his then White House counsel, Don McGahn, or had told his White House counsel, that he wanted to order the Justice Department to prosecute Hillary Clinton and former FBI Director James Comey. CNN went nuts over this. MSNBC went nuts over this. Fox covered it more sparingly. How big a story is this?
I mean, it is a big story. The president is not supposed to be meddling in any affairs from an independent branch of government. But this is not completely new, which is why the amount of coverage is interesting. We saw him do this on the campaign trail, vowing to break up AT&T and Time Warner's merger, which is something that goes to the DOJ. He's tried to undermine Amazon through the DOJ. So we've seen him try to use this as a political tool. This is different, however, because it's not just a civic case. It's looking into two individuals for a crime.
Who are political rivals of the president. Sorry. So let me set up my question to you, Molly, by recalling this greatest hits moment from the second presidential debate in 2016.
If I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation, because there has never been so many lies, so much deception.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
So what Trump defenders in the media are saying, Molly, is that, well, the president didn't do it. He didn't take any action. These were just conversations.
Well, I just want to first of all point out that the Department of Justice is not independent of the president. The president is the civilian who oversees that department. And it's very important that law enforcement have political accountability, because that's what you need, whether you're in a city and it's a police force or whether you're the country at large.
I agree with you.
Donald Trump oversees the Justice Department.
Right.
That's absolutely true.
He has the power and the authority to set broad goals for the Justice Department. There is a tradition that a president doesn't directly meddle in criminal prosecutions.
Sure. And I think actually the big story is he promised that he would go after Hillary Clinton. There are things that should be gone after, and he in fact backed off from that as soon as he was elected. And this entire story, which was sourced to two anonymous people who were supposedly familiar with the conversation, is about how he didn't order any prosecution of Hillary Clinton. But more than that, I think we also should think about how politicized the Justice Department has gotten. I mean, we currently have a special counsel going after Donald Trump, supposedly for the crime of treasonously colluding with Russia to steal an election.
Deputy Attorney General, I would note.
Right.
Yeah,
who was also cited in this whole thing by Rosenstein.
But we
was also in the midst.
We do have some problems with political prosecutions. You saw in the Hillary Clinton investigation that the Justice Department had her and a bunch of other people on false statements. They didn't prosecute those. Have you seen that with this special counsel, where anyone who makes a false statement is charged to the fullest? So you want to make sure you have a Justice Department that is seen as being not political. I don't think they're in that place right now. But this story in particular,
maybe they're actually less political because they are actually following the letter of the law, whereas previously, as you just mentioned, they weren't.
No, they actually have wide leeway whether they choose to prosecute or not, but they should be consistent in how they do it.
Getting back to the Times story, and by the way, the White House had no comment for the story, so you didn't have these outrage denials that this was fake news, which was interesting. The fact that the president didn't do anything may be, according to the story, because Don McGahn, again, in the White House counsel, had White House lawyers write up a memo and present it to the president saying there will be dire political consequences if you do this. You will be accused of abuse of power, and it could possibly lead to impeachment. So he did his job as he saw it in sort of protecting the president.
Right, and now Don McGahn is gone. So let's not forget that. I mean, I think that, maybe...
You're not suggesting that these two
No,
are...
no, absolutely not. I'm not saying, I'm just saying that, the absence of that potential checks and balance is no longer there, and I think that is significant. One thing that I did notice in all of this is that the issue of the acting attorney general is also sort of brought into this, Matt Whitaker, and he actually, I guess according to these unnamed sources, said he was ready to talk about this issue, but at the same time wanted to placate Trump, but didn't want to cross a line. So I'm fascinated that there isn't more coverage on the role of Matt Whitaker in these conversations about quote unquote abuse of power.
There has been some critical coverage because of his history of criticizing the Mueller investigation. I think some of that will come back. And also, Sarah, because the president just submitted written answers to Mueller's questions and has made pretty clear he does not plan to testify in person. There's been a debate about that for about a year. So does this story in the New York Times have more resonance now because Mueller seems to be wrapping things up, and also because of the acting AG?
I think it does a little bit. And sort of going back to Molly's point, I just want to say that the president has time and time again tried to undermine the judicial or, the DOJ in his own way or form, whether it's tweets, et cetera, when he feels as though they're encroaching upon the Mueller investigation. And so the timing here, I think, is important.
You say undermine. Isn't he entitled to express his opinion?
He's entitled to express his opinion, of course, but, kind of going after the DOJ, which I know he has broad oversight of it, but it really is supposed to be acting independently of him. Right. It's not something most presidents do.
All right, just as it's heating up, I've got to get a break ahead. A media uproar over Ivanka Trump using private email, but are the comparisons to Hillary a little bit off the mark? And when we come back, the press unloading on President Trump for sticking with the Saudis. Mohammed bin Salman, the president, wrote that the Crown Prince might have had advance knowledge. Maybe he did, and maybe he didn't, and was pressed by reporters.
Because it's America first to me. It's all about America first. Saudi Arabia, if we broke with them, I think your oil prices would go through the roof. I've kept them down.
Jamal was my colleague and my friend, and I was shocked to see the president in such a cold-blooded way put his definition of U.S. national interests ahead of values.
As evil as this kingdom is, as I have said over the years, the president is right. Saudi Arabia has now emerged at an important point in history as a partner in the Middle East.
Molly Hemingway, you've written that many in the media have misinterpreted Donald Trump's policy on this because he's moved away from foreign interventions, for example, particularly those based on morality. But it's still striking for so many in the media to hear him say of the Crown Prince, despite the CIA findings, maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
Well, first of all, I want to point out that we have word of what the CIA findings were because there was an anonymous leak. We don't have anything that we can all point to.
There's no report we can read, yes.
And then there's also the issue of whether the CIA should be setting foreign policy, whether they have a good track record of trying to dictate foreign policy in the Middle East. We have in recent decades seen where they did not do a very good job.
The slam dunk in Iraq, perhaps?
Yes. So the idea that they should be setting it, I think, is one of the errors that we saw in the media coverage. In general, though, yes, Donald Trump has a very different foreign policy than what we saw in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party over the last few decades. We had this idea, we had sort of an experiment with spreading democracy or spreading American values, that this would be, we would invade countries and then they would greet us as liberators, as Dick Cheney said, and then it would all go very well. Well, it didn't go very well. We've had a bunch of failures, we've had a bunch of money and a bunch of lives lost, and I think that the American people were not as elated with that approach. But you're seeing in the media coverage, they're still all in on this, spreading American values as a way, as being the primary issue in foreign policy. Donald Trump says it's national interest. What is in our interest at home and what's in our interest abroad? It is very different.
Sarah Fisher, I will grant that Jamal Khashoggi, his case, got far more coverage than if it had been some dissident because of the Washington Post connection, because he was an opinion journalist. But the Saudis lied repeatedly about his murder. First said he walked out of that consulate, then said, oh, it was a fist fight. I mean, there's a whole litany of lies here. And now Trump's CIA, he says these are CIA's feelings, not findings, but as leaked, as Molly says the guy running Saudi Arabia day to day ordered this murder. And that has led to the media denunciations.
Yeah, I mean, as a reporter, you can't help but look at the evidence of everything that we've seen so far. First, they say he walked out of the embassy and that he's alive. Then they're saying, oh, well, he died, but it was in a fist fight. I mean, and then you have people that are now being persecuted by MBS for what they are saying is a gruesome killing. So I think the problem here is that we know that they've been lying. In other cases, we've seen really gruesome situations, but the president is defending someone who we know has lied to the entire world about the situation. I mean, it looks foolish.
Caprica Farrow, is it fair then for the media to go to the next step, say, oh, Donald Trump, he always sides with autocrats, or he only cares about Saudi oil dollars, when there are other things to consider in the complex relationship between two countries? Sure.
Well, and actually CNBC made the point that, this may be more of that, President Trump is more transactional, and one of the things that he may get out of this is the Saudis stepping away from Yemen, for example. So he might actually get something out of this. But there's, I think, undeniably a trend here that warrants coverage and scrutiny. That, when you saw Trump standing next to Putin talking about, well, we're not really sure what our intelligence community and our law enforcement says about, election interference, and obviously his cozy relationship with the leader of North Korea. So there is, I think, an argument to be made there. But, is it a step too far? I don't know, maybe not.
This is an intelligence community that went to war with the president several years ago, has done politicized leaking. You have not seen anyone really held accountable for it yet, even though some of these leaks were very, very bad criminal leaks.
But that doesn't take away the fact that the president
if you want the president to trust you, you probably should behave in a slightly different way.
Is it fair for the press to say, to dump on Trump over this, when previous presidents, without the hot spotlight of such a high-profile murder, also cooperated with Saudi Arabia, despite all kinds of terrible things by that regime? It's not just Saudi Arabia.
We have frequently made alliances with people who are very bad, most notably in World War II with the Soviet Union, which committed human atrocities on a scale that's almost unimaginable. Sometimes you do it because you have other interests in mind. It's not good. It's bad. We don't like
Arming the Afghans against the Soviets?
All right, we got to go. Sarah Fisher, Caprica Farrow, Molly, we'll see you later in the program ahead. It's not just Republicans and Democrats. Even independents have a big beef with the media. The White House ramped up its effort to revoke Jim Acosta's press pass after a federal judge in that lawsuit by CNN ordered his credentials temporarily restored. But then officials reversed themselves and agreed to permanently give the reporter back his hard pass. CNN dropped the lawsuit and basked in the outcome.
I must say, I think this has been a significant victory for CNN and for the country. We've now reinforced through the courts and through the White House backing down, we've reinforced the sanctity of the First Amendment.
The White House, criticized by the judge for a lack of due process, issued rules that say every reporter who's called on gets one question with follow-ups at the president's discretion and must give up the mic afterwards, precisely what Acosta failed to do or refused to do and his press conference confrontation with Trump. Now, this was largely a symbolic victory for the press because the judge said his narrow ruling wasn't on First Amendment grounds. It doesn't erase the widely criticized grandstanding by Jim Acosta, but there's no denying that CNN's suit forced the administration to back down. The White House view is that it sent a strong message that disruptions at news conferences won't be tolerated. And it would be encouraging, in my view, if both the president and the press were a bit more civil at these televised spectacles. When Facebook's mounting problems are disclosed, Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg often react too slowly and attempt to minimize the misconduct. It was days after a New York Times investigation found the two executives holding back crucial information about Russian infiltration and phony news and hiring a Republican PR firm using questionable tactics that Zuckerberg sat down with CNN's Laurie Siegel. She asked him about that company, Definers Public Affairs, linking Facebook's critics to Democratic donor and Jewish philanthropist George Soros, calling that a common tactic among anti-Semitic groups.
Does that strike you as stooping low?
Yeah, I wasn't particularly happy about that piece of it, and that's certainly a big part of when I read about this, what made me want to look into this more deeply. The intention here was never to attack an individual.
He wasn't particularly happy. But Facebook admitted on the eve of Thanksgiving asking for the Soros dirt. And Sheryl Sandberg, in direct contradiction of her previous denials, knew about Definers, which Facebook fired after the Times report. Quote, "Some of their work was incorporated into materials presented to me, and I received a small number of emails where Definers was referenced," Sandberg said in a blog post taking full responsibility. Well, so much for pleading ignorance. And in the same post, outgoing Facebook policy chief Elliot Schrage defended Definers' tactics but said the firm went too far. Quote, "I'm sorry I let you all down. I regret my own failure here." You know what? We all regret Facebook's failures. Ahead on Mediabuzz, the next White House Correspondents' Dinner won't feature a comedian. And the last comedian is really ticked off. But first, why everyone, even those in the middle, hate the press these days. Frank Luntz is in the house.
Pay attention.
Only days left for you to become a Fox Nation founder.
Get new can't-miss live opinion shows daily and documentaries and specials that tell the real stories behind the headlines.
Exclusively on Fox Nation.
Plus, get limited-time available exclusive merchandise and Fox Nation special access to events with your favorite personality.
Independents in a New Hampshire focus group assembled by Frank Luntz also see the news business as biased.
I don't think the media treats anything fairly. I think the media is too skewed left and right, and they don't really see anything in the middle.
I will switch channels. I'll do CNN, and then I'll go to Fox, and then I'll go to MSNBC, and you can just sense the slant. But that information's helpful.
I think the media now has an agenda, whether it is Fox, CNN, whoever.
You don't think they tell the truth?
I don't think they consistently tell the truth.
And joining us now here in Washington is Frank Luntz, the veteran Republican pollster. So these independents don't seem as angry as some of your earlier focus groups, but they seem to share a disdain for what they view as the partisan media.
There's been a deterioration of confidence, of trust in all of our institutions. It's being driven by politics. This election cycle was certainly one of the worst in terms of negativity that was put together by one people. The organizations are trying to find some common ground. And Howie, you've had me on here a few times. That's my mission for 2019. That's my New Year's resolution, to find a way that people can disagree without the anger or rancor, to find those areas where we still agree, even if we may disagree on the details. We got to do something. We can't live this way anymore.
I'm listening to these people, and they're talking about Fox and MSNBC and CNN, and they say it's biased. But it occurs to me that they're not making any distinction between news and opinion, and that they're defining each network in a way by their pundits. At least that's how it seems to me.
But how can they make a distinction when those networks, including this one, yes, privately there is a distinction. There's a certain hour. And
it's not private. When you watch Special Report with Bret Baier, to take Fox as an example, you're getting a newscast. When you watch Primetime on Fox or MSNBC or CNN, you're getting people who spout opinions that you may agree with or disagree.
But the 11 p.m. show on Fox is supposed to be news. It's not supposed to be opinion. So it's not clear what you're getting at each specific time. It may be obvious to you. It's not obvious to you.
You're saying it's confusing.
It's confusing, but more importantly, there's nothing that has the public. The thing that I have found, and I've done focus groups in all 50 states, and that's my goal, in 2019 to find some way to go to 50 states in 50 weeks to show the American people what they themselves are thinking and saying and believing. There are so many shows that have Howie Kurtz on it and have Sean Hannity and have the people on CNN, MSNBC. We get all the punditry we need. What we never have, never, is the voice of the public. And that, I think, will begin to change the way we speak to each other.
That's why I love focus groups. But let me ask you this, because if the media are, as I think you believe, fueling anger, fueling polarization, fueling partisanship, because that's what gets clicks and ratings, then isn't that the market at work? Aren't they, in a sense, giving people what they want?
But they have the ability, and I had this back and forth with Chuck Todd from NBC because he was critical. He said that there's a difference between the cable networks and the broadcast networks. The broadcast networks don't let people hear what each of them think. They only have the pundits. The broadcast networks put someone on the left and someone on the right, so it automatically fuels this debate. What the public wants, they want the facts that they need, they want the information they deserve, and they want to know that they're being told the truth. And the problem is they're not getting what they need, and they're not getting what they deserve.
You got a wave of positive reaction when you were on this program last time talking about this subject and anger and loss of faith in media and politics.
It gives me a headache. This yelling and screaming
in the Trump
is
era.
Too much.
Okay, but then there was a wave after that of negative reaction, and some people were saying, isn't this the guy who worked with Newt Gingrich in 1994 in putting together the Contract with America and suggested that Democrats and their policies be described with such words as corrupt, greedy, hypocrisy, sick, and traitors?
Those words are not mine. Those words are Joe Gaylord's words, and I want the world, thank you for doing that. I want the world to know I didn't write that. That came out of GoPac, and it came 2 years before I even met Newt Gingrich. It came from when Joe Gaylord was running it. And because of the web and how it works, when one person writes something that's a lie, everyone else assumes that it's true. But I hate that language. That language is wrong. That language is awful.
But the broader point, Frank, is that you come out of a Republican background, and you suggested ways for Republicans to win elections. That was your job.
But the contract with America was all positive.
You was 10 things that the Republicans were going to do.
And they made a commitment to do it.
And they won both houses of Congress.
And if they didn't, they invited voters to throw them out. Howie, the thing we need more than anything else in politics, in justice, in the media is accountability.
Do you
and a positive
regret
accountability.
any of the tactics of your past? And are you now moving to a different place when you talk about, I want to spend 2019 finding common ground? That's not Frank Luntz, the partisan warrior.
I'm not. It's hard to be a partisan warrior when you see the damage that's done. I still have my philosophy. I still believe in a more efficient, more effective government. I still believe in accountability and education.
Do you still consider yourself a Republican?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know anymore because there's some things that the Republicans say that I don't believe in. And I'll give you a specific example. In the inner city today, the programs, the Democratic programs on poverty that spend billions of dollars have failed. And my mentees, people from good projects, good partners, I hope those guys are listening now, they are making a change that Republicans need to support. It is not pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you have no boots to do it and have no adults in your life to give you that direction. But it's also not spend billions of dollars trying to make a change because that won't work.
Is it because...
If you want me to repudiate that, absolutely.
Okay.
The programs of the left and the right don't work.
Let me ask this important follow-up. Is it because Donald Trump, who you've tangled with a couple of times, is president, that Frank Luntz can sit here at this table and say to me, I don't know whether I'm still a Republican?
I don't like the tone and the demeanor of either of them. I think they both live to fight against each other. And what they should be is what Trump said in his convention. It was the best comment that Trump made in 2016. I will be your voice. That's what the American people are watching. I want to bring that voice to television in all 50 states. And I'm desperate for politicians who, instead of speaking their own words, will speak the words of the American people.
Sounds to me like you're becoming an independent without using those words, but we really appreciate the candid conversation. Frank Luntz, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
Coming up, the flap over Ivanka's email is at payback time for the media's Hillary supporters. Plus, now that the featured guest at the next White House press dinner is an actual journalist, Donald Trump says, hey, I might attend.